Hopefully my internet won't go out, or like my thing won't do that thing again. Y'all being here by yourselves.
Just entertaining ourselves.
Yes.
Right. Just carry on without me.
Yeah, we could just, talk. We'll just go through the questions.
Ad-lib. I'm just seeing if we can cross-post. Let's have a look.
Yeah, we can take a couple of seconds to let people find us, because Facebook hasn't been showing notifications. It's been weird with notifications lately. So.
And are you sharing?
Changing it?
Are you sharing to your main page?
To the main page, yeah.
Is that the Not an Autism Mum?
That's right.
Right. Okay. I'm trying to find it. Where are we? Oh, there we are. Yay. Okay. Right. And then has that gone to Academy? Let's have a look. I know Sai.
People were tuning in.
Yeah, Sai was thinking of being here, so I don't know in the comments.
There's
Sai,
nobody in the comments yet.
Not yet. If you're here, you can say hi.
Oh, we're just trying to figure out whether...
Hey, Angelina. Angelina's one of my admins.
Oh, cool.
Okay. Yeah, so I'm trying to work out, because I'm sure you made us like co-host. So I thought it would come up so that I could do it, cross-post it.
You might be able to press share on the post on Not an Autism Mom.
Oh, yeah.
That's how I will cross-post.
Okay, we'll do that.
Hey, Kimberly. That's another one of my admins.
Hi, Kimberly. Yes, the one word we've been talking about, English words compared to American words. The one word that English people think is hilarious is bangs, because they say fringe, which makes sense, a fringe coming down. But bang, now I'm American. It actually, living in the UK made me think, what does bangs mean? Like, where did it come from? Why is there a bang on your forehead? It's very odd.
That is such a good question. I have no idea. I've never even thought about that before.
For a very long time, I didn't know what they were talking about. So whenever you would see, the word them talking about bangs on like shows or films, I'd be like, I have no idea what these people are talking about.
Yeah, because they say fringe. What's going to see? We got.
So I think I saw Sai sausages. So there's Sai.
Kimberly, Angela. Oh, and there, yes, sausages. We've got Sai.
Sai and sausages.
Hi, Nicola.
Hi, everyone. Okay, some people are tuning in, and we have this cross-posted to Twitter and YouTube. So fancy.
Ooh.
I'm not going to monitor all the comments on those other platforms because that's confusing to me.
It's too much.
Yeah. Hey, Amy. Okay, well, we can get started. Let me take off my ticker.
Okay.
I feel like really official with that ticker. I really do. I feel like a news organization.
So when I moved over to StreamYard, I think Bobby Ellman was happy. Was it Bobby Ellman or maybe it was Samara? Because it felt like, which is a very American thing. We don't tend to do it quite so much on our TV shows. Like sometimes we do in the news, but I think it's more of an American thing.
I didn't know that.
Having a timer. Yeah.
No, the ticker.
The ticker around the bottom. Oh, yes. Yeah. We don't do that. That's an American thing. You have to have as much information as possible.
I know, like with all the stocks and stuff that nobody knows.
Nobody knows. Yeah.
Nobody knows. Like, why are you even showing that? And anybody that knows what that is not going to be getting their information from y'all.
No. That's so true.
Okay, so we can get started. Are y'all ready? Okay,
yeah.
Cool. I'm ready. So welcome, everyone. My name is Megan, and I am your host. Usually I'm in the book club, but today we are on the big page, so that's pretty awesome. I am here with Dr. Chloe Farahar.
Farahar?
Farahar. I butcher everybody's name, no
I'm
matter
the same.
what. And we're here with
I don't know. It depends. Yeah.
with Dr. Annette Foster. Are you a doctor yet?
Not yet.
Almost.
I have my Viva in 2 weeks. So in 2 weeks, hopefully.
Nearly there. Nearly there.
We're going to have to talk about what a Viva is, because
Yeah.
that was a new one to me. So Chloe and Annette do a lot of things together. Y'all are educators on Academy, which we're going to talk about in a little bit. And that's a great resource if you're a parent, an educator, if you're autistic yourself. That's a great resource to check out. Y'all have lots of videos, lots of different people up there talking about the autistic experience, which is pretty awesome. And then you have another website called So You Think You're Autistic.
Yes. So is it So You're Autistic?
So You're Autistic, ? And then in brackets, it's like, or think you are, because we acknowledge and are very, very respecting and accepting of people without diagnosis.
For sure.
Yeah.
For
Yeah.
sure.
And sometimes it's for people that are questioning as well. So basically it's the pre and post kind of diagnostic support program. So people who are like awaiting diagnosis, or just after they've been diagnosed, or if they think they might be autistic, or if they've had a negative experience of being autistic. And it's basically kind of teaching autistic people about the positive autistic identity, autistic culture and community, and how that can really affect your well-being. And the most important part of it is having a community and kind of knowing other autistic people. Yeah. So yeah, and we basically, the resources on there is really good, because me and Chloe wanted to create something that we didn't have when we discovered that we were autistic, which we were both late discovered autistic people. That kind of sift out all the bad stuff, because there's a lot of bad stuff online, and just kind of have the informative stuff from the autistic community that's going to be helpful for kind of people who are just discovering that they're autistic.
It's so important, because as soon as you type in autism in Google, you get all the trash, and it's yeah, and it's I don't know, damaging on them. I mean, to me, it was damaging to me as a parent to find all that extra information that really wasn't positive. Not that I need anything positive. I just need something that's not, really, really sad.
Yeah. Yeah. And
it's also not true to life. It's not what it means to be autistic. It's a very abstract idea. Because Annette and I, we always talk about how there really isn't autism. There's no such thing as autism. There are only autistic people. Autism is a concept and a construct, but that's what you find.
Yeah, and it's very easy to talk about autism as a construct and then kind of get into all these kind of ideas about it and not realize that actually you're talking about autistic people, and they're human beings just like everyone else.
That was like an actual question I asked when my kids were diagnosed. I was like, so, like, what does that mean? So, like, yesterday he did not have it, and like today he does have something. Like, it was just so confusing to me not even to know anything about it. Like, so what is this thing? And this
and how does it relate to my child? Yeah.
Right. So
yeah, realizing that it's interconnected. It's like part of your child, who they are. It can't be, and I think to a certain extent, a lot of times when the medical model talks about it as if it's kind of something that you can take out and put to the side,
Yeah, or like,
not possible.
Or like treat.
Yeah.
Treat. Yeah. It's very odd. It was very odd to me, and nothing could be truer than it's just part of who they are, and just nothing could be truer than that.
And makes them the beautiful person that they are.
It really does.
The most important thing. Yeah.
Okay, I want to say hi to people. Hi, Jennifer. I want to say hi.
Hello. Oh,
Hi, Brian. Thanks for joining us and thanks for saying hi. So, Chloe is a doctor, a PhD,
Yes.
right?
I'm not a therapist or a clinical. I always have to caveat that.
You're a
I'm not
doctor
a
of psychology, yeah.
Social psychology, is that right?
Yeah. Although I've had a conversation with Dr. Monique Botha about I may affiliate more with community psychology. Basically, I didn't get on with clinical. It just didn't make sense to me in terms of people aren't broken. People don't have broken brains. They experience trauma or they are neurologically different and things. So I was much more interested in social psychology. So yeah, my PhD was looking at how to reduce mental health stigma with a script about neurodiversity to actually make people see the more balanced perspective as opposed to the medical narrative, which is only one narrative. Something I talk about in some of the training that I deliver, which is that there are multiple narratives about what it means to be autistic. Well, there's multiple narratives about autism. There's some narratives about being autistic, which there's a big nuance. But yeah, so it's about the balance in narratives, and we don't have that in the medical narrative, and it's just one narrative of many. And I just don't think it's actually the most convincing either. So when you look at evidence, literature, and so on about this thing called autism as a disorder, the evidence doesn't really exist for it to be a disorder.
And it's an unhelpful narrative. I mean,
yeah, it's there's no everything I talk about more recently, and Annette and I are talking about a lot, is the importance of fostering positive autistic identity via the culture, the community, and creating spaces. And ultimately, that medical narrative, like I say, is one narrative of many. It's just the most dominant. Even if it were true that we have autism spectrum disorder, in quotation marks, you can't have a positive sense of self based on that narrative. So even if it were the case that we do have a disordered brain, for instance, okay, right, what do I do with that information? How does that improve my well-being? Or help me thrive in a society that's not built for my neurology? It doesn't. So yeah, that was what I was trying to look at. How do we improve our self-esteem, our self-worth with the neurodiversity narrative? Because we do.
And then halfway through her PhD, she discovered that she was autistic. So you started the PhD not knowing.
Really?
Yeah. So I was always interested in mental health, stigma, and reducing stigma. I came across the neurodiversity narrative in 2012, wrote a terrible play about mental health, stigma, how to reduce this, and the neurodiversity narrative to replace it. So yeah, I was already interested in neurodiversity. I already had the perspective and really started to understand. I mean, interestingly, I went into my degree, my psychology degree, wanting to do clinical psychology. And then when I started reading, learning, researching, and doing my education, I realized I had it wrong, and that the clinical blaming individuals for having faulty brains was not the way to go. That's why I was more interested in social psychology and neurodiversity, because we live in a disordered society. So it makes sense that there are people who respond in distressed ways, right? Psychologically, for instance, like voice hearing, anxiety, and so on. So I was more interested in that bigger picture. So yeah, neurodiversity, carried on doing neurodiversity based sort of interests and education. Started my degree. I was dating, and still am, an autistic person with attention differences, and still hadn't twigged that I was autistic. And then I just started seeing more female presenting representations of autistic experience. And I was like, that makes sense. So I got diagnosed in my second year.
Yeah. And then we met and we started working together. And then to a certain extent, Chloe was working a lot on the projects that we were doing with So You're Autistic, and writing kind of theories about autistic experience. And she kind of had to go back to her thesis, which was quite hard for you, wasn't it? You were like, I'm done with this. I'm moving on.
Did you find you had to make corrections? Is that why you went back to it? Or
No, because like I say, because I was so embedded already within the neurodiversity narrative, that was always the driving force since my undergrad for how I understood psychological and neurological divergence.
Yeah.
So that didn't really change. It was more the case of I'd already written the thesis. It was in my head.
Yeah.
Like I just didn't want to, you just get a bit fed up basically of doing it. And I'm doing a PhD is kind of good. Like a lot of us as autistic people, if we do PhDs, we don't do them for the sake of doing a PhD. Does that make sense?
It does.
We do them because somebody is willing to pay us to do the thing we're really interested in. Right. So the PhD is like the doctorate is a byproduct of being able to do your dedicated interests.
Yeah, which is amazing.
It is amazing.
Yeah.
But I got to a point where I was like, I prefer to do hands-on stuff. I like working to support people. And so I was much more interested in the stuff Annette and I was doing. So I like training. I like working and supporting autistic people in the things that we were doing, the programs and projects and things. So yeah, you get to the point where
it's so meaningful and you're making a huge different impact in people's lives. So I get that totally.
Yeah.
Totally.
Yes. So yes, I'm actually from Seattle because I saw somebody from California, which is quite cool. Hi. Yeah. So I grew up in the Northwest. Yeah, I grew up in the Northwest, but I moved to the UK in 2001. So a very long time ago. So I've been here quite a long time. And I was diagnosed in 2011. I kind of went through a lot of issues with my mental health since I was a child, really. And it wasn't until I finally kind of discovered that I was dyslexic and dyspraxic at 35, and then finally autistic at 39, which was 10 years ago now. And then I ended up deciding that I wanted to use, because I've been a lecturer and teacher of art and an artist for 20 years, and I wanted to kind of use that to help autistic people and kind of create a project based around, what autistic experience is for women, non-binary, trans people. So yeah, I basically created several performances and workshops. I worked with about 20 autistic people for my project, creative workshops, kind of exploring their experiences, and ultimately discovering autistic space and discovering how important, like we said, positive autistic identity, learning about autistic culture and developing autistic culture and community is. And me and Chloe kind of went from there. So yeah, and I'm kind of now going back to my thesis because, I like doing stuff a lot more than writing as well. So, but yeah, I've finished writing, which is great. But yeah, I had to kind of go back to that.
I love this sense of community that y'all are both creating, like in your own ways and together. It seems like you're making just a broader community of all of you, because I feel like that's so important to make sure people don't feel like they're alone in that, with all the negativity that is out there, and probably the negativity that they've grown up with,
And I mean, that's kind of as well, like I say, we're focusing on that quite a lot now, because with our programs, with our social groups, and then as they've obviously sort of, like I say, got broader, like with Academy, yes, we're an education platform, but also it is about that bringing everybody together to have a conversation about being autistic, for instance, and then having the groups. So when we hopefully when we actually apply for it, some grant funding to further develop our So You're Autistic program, see if we can get it in the NHS, that kind of thing. I really feel, and I know Annette does as well, that we do a bit of education in that program. We do, Tanya is a community. Yeah. We do education. What is autism? What's autistic experience? Because they're different. We do that kind of stuff. What's masking? Which we rely very heavily on Kieran, and his knowledge. But ultimately, I think really what we're doing, it's always about connecting autistic people who were previously isolated.
Yeah.
And that's, again, like I say, what I write about at the moment, which is that you can't have a positive sense of self and identity when you're a person with autism, in quotation marks, because that's a very isolating identity. And I think, interestingly, a lot of people who will say, well, being autistic isn't an identity, you shouldn't, you know, discuss yourself in terms of having an identity, it's a label and all this kind of thing. It's kind of like, what they're not understanding is by calling us people with autism or a person with autism, they're already giving us an identity and a narrative. It's just not one we want or get to choose.
Yeah, or
So
by calling us weird or strange or, you know, antisocial or whatever. Those are all giving us kind of identities that we don't want. So it's about embracing something that is a positive thing for us. And yeah, another way that a lot of autistic people have referred to it in writing is, you know, cultures of one. There's all these cultures of one all over the world of autistic people, and none of us are able to connect. And really, it's very difficult to kind of recover from a lifetime of that, of invalidation, people telling you that you're strange and weird, and that you shouldn't stim, and you shouldn't do this, and you shouldn't do that, and you should make eye contact, without other people, you know, without other people that feel the same way you do, that experience things that you do. And also that celebrate your difference, because autistic people have similarities, but we also have so many differences as well. And I think that's one of the amazing things about the autistic community, is that we do celebrate each other's differences, and that's a positive thing. Yeah.
All I was
Before we go into, go ahead, Chloe.
Yeah,
go ahead.
Sorry, all I was going to add is that we see that you see somebody comes into autistic spaces where they've not really interacted with other autistic people knowingly as autistic people, if that makes sense. And they'll come in as people with autism, in quotation marks, very isolated. They usually have very low self-esteem, quite poor mental well-being, for instance. Not always, but a lot of the time.
Apologizing for their existence.
And then by the end of the sort of 8 sessions where they get to connect with other autistic people authentically, safely, with no judgment, they kind of leave as autistic people, and you do drastically see an improvement in their well-being. And that's what we kind of want to try and go on to do research to show that's what it does.
Sure.
The education part is just a structure, it's a way to structure the sessions, but that's not really what's happening, it's connection.
Yeah.
Before we go into your book, it dawned on me that you all are really changing the way people are educated. I know that it's slow for y'all. I know it feels like at a snail's pace, but like we've been talking over in my sections of the world, like, you know, about changing the way people are educated so that our educators change the way they educate, right? Like, because it's a cycle of information. You know, you go to college and what if instead of having abnormal psychology class, right? Because that's one of the basic ones. What if instead of having that abnormal psych class, you have a neurodiversity class, right? Instead, like that would change the game. For so many.
I teach, I teach on an access course. So it's part of our university, and it's to help people who don't have the sort of grades to get into university. So they do this course called an access course for over 2 years. And I teach the psychology on that. And yeah, when it came to doing the abnormal psychology, in quotation marks, I refused to call it abnormal psychology. I mean, I retitled it, and then I explained throughout that why abnormal was a misnomer, why it was really inaccurate and not appropriate. And they were fantastic students, because you could really see the difference, teaching them to be more humanizing.
Well, it makes sense, doesn't it? Like, these are our people. Like, these are, like, we're talking about actual people here. We're not talking about somebody in a different planet or something, right? Like, we're talking about real people, our friends, our brothers, or sisters, and why would we talk about them in that manner, right?
Yeah,
that's the issue. That's the issue with focusing on this idea of autism. Is it completely dehumanizes it completely, because people will talk about it as a construct, like there's no person involved. And it's just not the case. So as soon as you humanize it and you start talking about autistic people, which the people that argue between person first, identity first, that they'll say that the person first part
respectful.
is more respectful, etc. But it's actually but they don't understand that actually talking about autistic people humanizes the person, and they really struggle with that because they see it as it's that very frustrating things that they're just connecting it to this idea of disease or disorder. I just wanted to, because Jennifer made a point, so what you just said, Megan, about what they teach, and it's just perpetuating the same old knowledge over and over again. And Jennifer's saying it is diagnosis based on behaviours and a need to fix, but behaviours are communication. When will this change? I mean, slight nuance in the behaviours are communication. Sometimes it's not communication, but it's definitely information. So sometimes the communication's not there, but the information is there. Absolutely. So when will that change? Parents are told to utilise behaviourism. It's awful. We know better, but medical model still guides everything. And frustratingly, one of the first things you will learn in like psychology 101, if you do a basic psychology anything, they will talk about the different sort of approaches or the different disciplines within psychology. So they'll talk about social psychology, they'll talk about clinical psychology, abnormal in quotation marks, and they'll talk about behaviorism and behavioral. And one of the first things you'll learn is how flawed it is, because it's ignoring the cognitive, it's ignoring the emotions, and that's just the basic stuff. We're not even talking about we're not even talking about autistic people here. We're just talking about the discipline of behaviorism. It misses too much, and it's just superficial looking at behaviors from the outside.
Right.
And so Jennifer's
and ultimately not looking at why those behaviors are happening. And for me and Chloe, our experience is that most autistic behavior can be explained by sensory experience, by our autistic people's sensory experience of the world. And if you can think about it like that, okay, what is happening sensorially in the room that might be affecting my child, that can completely change the way you look at some things, because you might be like, oh yeah, there's a really loud noise over there, there's really bright lights, or and that can really, really help to kind of think of it that way, instead of thinking about some kind of behavior that you need to stop or change, or which I'm sure a lot of you mums already know. But I think it's really important to point out that sensory information is just so much a part of autistic experience, and needs to be seen much more so within the diagnostic criteria at some point. And I also think, the neurodiversity language of neurodiversity has to be a part of an autistic space. Without it, you could have a school with lots of autistic people there, but if they're within the pathological paradigm language, which is disease-based language or disorder-based language, there won't be autistic space. They won't feel like they can be themselves. So it's really important to have the neurodiversity language within a space for autistic people to start to heal. And within a school as well. Like if you've got a group of autistic kids that have a support group or something, but the person who's running it doesn't speak in the language of neurodiversity, it's not going to help.
It's damaging. It's probably doing more harm. But that's why, what both of you are doing is so important, because y'all are in, I mean, not infiltrated. I mean, y'all are there, right?
Yeah, we're infiltrated.
You're infiltrating the system, right? From the roots of it. And I think it's so important, because it is like so heavily used in our school system, and our schools are so far behind because our teachers are being educated with this outdated information. Yeah. And behaviorism rules and so many of these classes and training.
And that's the final point that Jennifer made, like the medical model still guides everything. The medical model, the medical understanding, and when you look at the diagnosis for autism, right, it's all based on behavior, because that's the only thing non-autistic people can understand or see. So you can see how it's literally infiltrated everywhere. So this very outdated, flawed behavioral approach, which is, like I say, do a 101 psychology, and you will have your, you know, your tutor, your teacher saying to you, you know, right, what's the critique of this method, this approach? It's just focusing on behavior. What happens to the intent, the thoughts, the feelings, you know, all that kind of thing. And that's all that the diagnostic manual has to go on as well. So the manual is purely behavior driven and based.
Yeah, and that's one of the things that Chloe and I say in the article that we wrote, is that, you know, we're actually a minority. You know, we would, 10 years ago, there wouldn't be as many autistic women doing PhDs and actually being out about being autistic. They would most likely have not disclosed because they didn't want to be discriminated against. So yeah, that's.
Let's talk about the book, y'all. Let's talk about the book. Okay, y'all are here to talk about this book. Okay, the new book is called Lived Experiences of Ableism in Academia. And the link is in the comments. Thank you to Kimberly and Angelina for doing that for us. This is not an autistic specific book, right? This has lots of different disabilities and experiences from just a broad range of people. And I don't know how to say that, but yeah, so that's the book in all. But your chapter is called Autistics in Academia, right?
It's literally hashtag Autistics in Academia.
Yeah.
I didn't know if that was like just a rough draft that y'all sent me.
No. So it's because, yeah, if you're on Twitter, you literally can find Autistics in Academia via the hashtag. So it was a cheeky.
It's all the infiltrators. It's all the autistic infiltrators into academia.
That's gonna be our new word now. We're infiltrators. We're infiltrators. I love that. Yeah. So your chapter is specifically on you're sharing your experiences as PhD students / workers. And for those people like me who are not in academia, right? Like, as I was reading their chapter, I didn't understand what was happening, what they were talking about, because it's confusing to me that you are both a student as well as an employee and in some sort of like gray area. So can somebody explain that for people like me?
And it's a very weird position to be in. And I don't necessarily know whether it's the same in the States. I think, Annette, you were talking about that. It is, okay, yeah. I mean, usually your scholarship, your funding to be able to do your PhD research, to live and to do your research, is based on you working for the university. So they don't just give you the money and let you get on with it. So you have to, you can do your research, but at the same time, you will be expected to do a certain number of hours of teaching, marking, usually seminars, kind of the grunt work that means that the other academics who are, already got their PhDs, they can actually just get on lecturing and or doing their research. So you tend to end up doing seminars and things. Yeah.
You also want to do it because it gives you experience, because obviously, then you have experience when you go into the job market.
Except for marking. Marking is pretty evil.
Yeah, it is.
Marking is not fun.
For me, who I'm dyslexic, dyspraxic, and autistic. Well, possibly ADD as well. I'm a little bit of everything, but
might as well throw it in.
Yeah, it's the only one I haven't been officially diagnosed for. But yeah, marking is very difficult for me.
And so what that means is that, so in colleges, I know in the States, you can have accommodations as a student. I know I had accommodations as a student, and that helped me get through college, right? Mm-hmm. So like maybe one of my accommodations was to have a meeting with the professor before the beginning of the school year, so that I could know that professor, they could know me, and we would have, that kind of, not bond, but familiarity with each other, or that maybe I could have extra days on assignments or whatever it was, or I could have the syllabus up front. If that teacher does not give a syllabus, I could have that and due dates ahead of time. But when you transition from a student, like in a typical university, to a student slash employee, what happens to those accommodations? Like, what is going on here?
I think the higher you go up, the less accommodations there really are. I mean, I think actually since me and Chloe have been students, it's, well, to a certain extent, Chloe wrote an article right before her Viva or after your Viva, I can't remember, which is basically a defense for a thesis. So you write a thesis and then you have to defend your thesis to other academics that have read your thesis.
Orally, verbally as well, which is,
yeah.
So that's obviously if you're situationally mute or anxious, that's a problem.
And in person, like in front of them, is this intimidating as hell?
Yeah, very intimidating. Yeah. And and Chloe wrote an article basically about reasonable adjustments because, you know, for both of us starting PhDs, there wasn't really much reasonable adjustments there were for undergraduates. So undergraduate students, but not for when you go up to PhD level to a certain extent. I think it's changing, but slowly.
And I think that, so Bobby's saying, would you say that is all universities in the UK, or are some better at accommodating? It is definitely a mixed bag.
Let me put that up.
Yeah, definitely since, so I defended my Viva, my thesis in December 2019. So I technically graduated, but obviously we don't, lockdown, in summer last year. And in that time, I've been still doing training with people. So I've been talking to a couple of other universities, and to see you can see a real difference in the accommodation supports across universities in the UK. So while we do have the Equality Act that does state how further education, higher education, what it should be doing, it's really quite vague. So some universities are much better. And I would say Kent, generally speaking, certainly in comparison to a lot of other universities we've spoken to, is actually very good.
It's very good. It is.
Well, they have y'all there infiltrated.
True.
Yeah, their services have definitely increased.
They have
in terms of what they deliver, but we were lucky because they had an autism team, which a lot of universities, if they support autistic people at all, it'll be within their existing like disability services or mental health team services, that kind of thing. Whereas, we've actually got an autistic team, which is great.
Although it varies through departments as well. I mean, me and Chloe met in the support group that was supported through student support and well-being. But, when I started my degree, I was told by the woman who's supposed to be supporting students at that department that they'd never supported an autistic PhD student before. And I thought, I'm sure you've had autistic PhD students before, but you weren't aware of them being autistic and they didn't ask for support. So I think that's part of the problem, is that people think that, autistic people don't do PhDs, which actually I think we probably do more PhDs than non-autistic people. And there's been other departments as well where, there's autistic students that are not doing as well as the non-autistic students. So it varies.
Well, let's segue into that. I mean, what can universities and colleges, what can they do to help support their autistic students? I think that you already mentioned one, which was to maybe not even facilitate, but give the space for an autistic support group. That seems like an amazing idea. I know, I think I told you about LaDerek Horn in our pre-meeting, and he talks a lot about that. I think he does a lot of work with dyslexia, and he talks about creating I don't even know what he says now. But just like having a space where you can meet other people and develop that sense of disability pride and knowing that you're not alone in that.
maybe a neurodiversity group. Yeah, we changed the wording of it because it was a support group, and we decided to call it an autistic social group, because that's what it is. We don't need support from each other to a certain extent just because we're autistic. And it's, creating an autistic space where all types of sociality, autistic sociality, like stimming, is encouraged, where it's encouraged that you don't have to have eye contact, that you don't even have to interact if you don't want to, you can just listen. So like having different levels of engagement as well, be accepted within that space, which is really important.
And dependent on the spaces that we're in. I mean, the thing is, I take a lot of what we do with our autistic students that we support. So this is the thing. So going back to, we were PhD students doing our own research and what have you. We were staff, so we were, having to, deliver teaching and what have you. But we also worked within student support and wellbeing in that time as well, because we were running the social group. We developed the support program, because doing the thesis isn't enough.
So we were like, do y'all sleep? Like, do you eat ever?
The thing is, those things take up more of your time. Like, if you actually put together the amount of time you actually spend doing your research, it's probably about 6 months within the 4 years that you actually spend doing it. It's if you actually compact it together. So I don't even know what my
we just want to help as many people as possible, I suppose. Absolutely. And it's like putting your theory into practice, isn't it? So yeah, and I think we're both very excited about doing that, So okay. Ooh, could this work? This could work. Yeah.
Sure.
We need to change things.
And that's it. So I was going to lose my train of thought, but I've got it back, I think. And it was, so doing all the things that we were doing with the autistic students, and my whole thing, and Annette's whole thing of like, being neurodivergent, truly neurodivergent friendly, and just understanding that when we go into a classroom, we know there's multiple neurodivergent people in that space, even if they don't have their inclusive learning plans. So that's like it depends on the university or even the country, but that'll be like a digital statement that says this person needs accommodation supports, and these are those accommodation supports. So if you disclose that to the university, you go to student support and wellbeing, they put your digital statement in, and staff are supposed to, I say supposed to, follow it. Yeah, read them and put those things in
first
place.
Read, then follow, right?
Yeah.
But not that they necessarily, and the issue is that they don't know actually what to do with that information a lot of the time. So some staff will say, well, it just states they're disabled and that they need these accommodation supports, which are usually quite basic. The I-class really just basic things that should just happen without even having an ILP, inclusive learning plan. And so they'll ask things like, well, it would probably be useful to actually know what their disability is. And it's like, well, actually it wouldn't, because the majority of you don't know what that would mean. You don't know what it means to be autistic. You have a narrow idea of what that means. So actually that probably wouldn't help anyone. So we took a lot of what we were doing with our autistic students and take it into the classroom. I was that odd lecturer that brought in our suitcase full of STEM objects and allowed all of my students, I had 5 seminar groups, which is like 80 students. So they all just think I'm really odd at the start, but by the end they get it. And it's like everyone's allowed to STEM, even though they're not autistic or have attention differences. We took what we'd learned from like Sean May's Autism Arts Festival, with the cards and badges that say in what way you are willing or able to communicate. So I took that into the classroom. All my students, regardless of disability, regardless of neurodivergence or whether they're neurotypical, all had to pick a card about how they could communicate that day. So please include me, table discussion only, just listening today, or alternate means of communication and things. So yeah, I'm that odd person, but by the end I
love that part in the chapter, really, when you were talking about coming in and basically you're normalizing these things that everybody could benefit from. It's not just that autistic people can benefit from stimming. I mean, everybody, you're sitting down for a long time in this class, in this lecture, and anybody can benefit from that, and anybody can benefit
concentration tool.
Yeah, for sure. I love that part in the chapter.
But this is the point as well. Once you get to that place where you've made all these really simple, cheap or free accommodations, because those cards, you can literally, I just printed them off on coloured paper from the stationery cupboard, you know, so there wasn't loads of money spent, you know, that kind of thing. You know, once you actually put all these free or cheap accommodations in place for every single student, then the ILP, so the inclusive learning plans for those disabled students who maybe need a little bit extra something, there's less work to do.
Yeah.
You're not lowering the bar, but you're lowering,
You're including more people, and you're making it more accessible for everyone.
Absolutely.
You know, and one of the things, like the one that says, you know, please include me, that's for people that are quite shy. But when you ask them a direct question, they can speak, and, you know, they can kind of, but they don't know how to kind of interject, or, you know, ultimately don't want to raise their hand or things like that. So it's all sorts of things like that. The other thing that we came up with was that, you know, when students have to give presentations, the fact that, you know, that they could give a presentation and record it and hand that in. And then people were saying, yeah, but that's not fair for other students who can't do that. And we said, well, why can't all students do that?
Why not?
And we're like, but then everyone would do that. It's like, actually, it's more work to record it than it is to do it in person. You know, most students will think they're going to record it, but then they're like, oh, forget it, I'll just do it on the day.
Yep.
You know, so it's only going to be the students who have that real social anxiety, which autistic students with social anxiety, you know, all sorts of different types of students, that will actually do the presentation. Because what happened with my students was I would have lots of students who just would not show up on the day that they had a presentation because it was just too stressful for them, and there was no accommodation, which I just think is not right. That shouldn't be the case. They should be allowed to give their presentation how they can give that presentation. It's not, they're still giving a presentation. It can even be shown to the other students so that people.
And I'm always interested, because I'll say, you know, you can make a cartoon, you could do blooming stop animation if you really had the time and the energy and things like that, because actually it's more interesting to see what people will come up with as well, as opposed to the very bog standard. I mean, me personally, I like delivering presentations. I'm always anxious, but I really like presentations. I love a PowerPoint, as Annette knows. You know, so those things are more comfortable for me, but for other people there's always other options. I think what was always interesting, so we had a bit of funding, me and another colleague, to create like neurodivergent, like a trial, like neurodivergent training, because this was the issue. Staff would get those inclusive learning plans and still really not understand,
be very resistant
to do. And so it comes back to this whole thing. But if we teach you the basics so that you can include everybody, and then you just have to maybe occasionally add an extra thing because it's something nobody's really thought of that, you know, might need accommodating. But even my cards, the card idea is, I mean, it's not my cards, but the ones that I end up using in all my lectures and seminars, sorry, there was pushback about those. And I'm like, they're the most simple, basic thing, because some frustratingly, some degrees or some courses or some modules within a course rely on participation, but it never states what that participation should look like. So to us as autistic people, like Annette says, participation to me is the person turned up, right? If that is an autistic person who really struggles in sensory environments that are quite difficult for them, in social environments, and they are there, that to me is, and us, is participation. So yeah, there was a bit of pushback about, but what if they pick the just listening today card every week? And I was like, okay, a couple of things. One, that's fine.
Yeah.
Right. Easy.
Why is it hurting you right now? Yeah.
Exactly. You know, there's other ways of testing people's knowledge, that they're understanding and things like that, right? So one, it's fine if they do. Two, what was interesting for me is throughout the couple of terms that I did teach with the cards, is that a number of students that would pick, for instance, just listening today. So I would go round, I'd see the cards and I'd be right, okay, I'm not going to ask that person any questions.
That pressure off. Yeah.
yeah, I can ask this person, I can ask this person. So I would come around to the tables and, you know, okay, anyone want to, you know, what have you been discussing, blah, blah, blah. And a lot of the time, not always, but the ones that picked the just listening today would contribute. So really what we'd given them was a safety blanket to be able to make the decision to participate in the way they wanted to.
That just gave me chills all over my body, Chloe, because what it did is it took away their fear and anxiety that they were focused on, like, oh my gosh, is the teacher going to call on me next? Yeah. The teacher going to call on me next? Oh my gosh, well, I need to make sure I have something to say. And you took all of that away so that they could enjoy whatever is happening in the class. And then, oh, I do have something to say about that. All that anxiety is
yeah. So I was already teaching like that. Then we got this training, money to develop this training, and we did we put a questionnaire out to our School of Psychology, which is a very big school. We have a lot of students, so we put out this questionnaire, got anonymous responses back, and when we collated it, the majority of people's fears, anxiety, regardless of neurodivergence type, so whether they had social anxiety, were autistic, had attention differences, the majority of their issue or anxiety was being called on in class.
Yeah.
It was, I feel anxious at this, I feel fear at this, and it was constant. And we did note that some people had said, so I think it's great that Chloe's, you know, or Dr. Farah, whatever class, I like the cards, whereas other people's classes didn't have that, and things like that. So that, like you said, you've hit the nail on the head, which is people's genuine fear that they're going to be called on, that they're going to be embarrassed in front of their peers because they say something that they think is wrong or silly. I mean, there's really no silly replies. But yeah, it's just taking that fear away.
And giving that validation as well, that all interaction is valid within your session, you know, and actually would also people would be more encouraged to go to the session if they know, okay, I'm not going to be called on unless I specifically want to be called on, you know, because the fear of that can stop people from even going to the session, to even go to the class, to go to school. And that's one of the things that I found, you know, in my research as well, when people took part in the performances, is kind of, they were saying, you know, you validated and accepted us for who we were, and you allowed for different levels of interaction, and therefore we wanted to take part, you know, and we knew that you would validate, you know, that there was not a wrong way of doing it. That's the other thing, you know, that you really accepted us for who we are and our ideas. And I think that's important as well. Obviously, sometimes there's a right and a wrong in education, but you can, you know, people's experiences and what they're talking about sometimes can be validated as well.
Especially when you have these students coming in from this trauma of schooling, and everything that they've been doing is wrong. So they automatically have that, you know, that preconception of how school is, and that they're probably going to get in trouble, and whatever they do is not right. In the book club, we had a minimally speaking a person up there, Danny Whitty, and he spells to communicate. So, you know, we were trying to get him in the book club and like hear all of the things he had to say, no matter what it was. And what we ended up doing is he did a PowerPoint, and I gave him questions in advance. I know that was one of the accommodations you were talking about. And I gave him the questions in advance. He made a PowerPoint, and then he actually felt regulated enough that he could attempt to speak it because he wanted to, right? But that was not a requirement.
It wasn't needed.
Like, as long as we're here, right? You didn't even have to type out anything. We could sit here together, you know? And it was just an amazing experience for me to see the diversity of language and communication styles, and that there is a place for all different types of communication. And it's so important for especially autistic students to know that.
And that's what's really quite sad, is we know a number of just amazing situationally mute autistic people, like students at the university. And I remember having a conversation with one of them, and I was getting his ideas about some training that I was going to be doing. So it was just me and him. So he felt relatively comfortable enough to use his mouth words, which is not, again, not expected. If he didn't want to, he didn't have to in any way. And what I asked him was, were there times in his class, because he doesn't talk in his class, were there times in his class that he's got ideas that he'd like to actually get out?
For sure.
And they're not giving him
An outlet.
any other means of communicating those ideas. So just because he can't use mouth words in that time doesn't mean he doesn't have ideas that he needs to share. And they weren't giving him the ability to do that. So I said, if you were to have these cards, so this is before I started using them with my students, if you were to have these cards, how would you feel about the alternate means of communication one? He was like, I'd get my ideas out.
Well,
like, without having that,
detriment of everyone in that class, that they don't get to hear what that student has to say. I mean, it's not just the detriment of him, which it is, obviously, but everyone in that class deserves to hear that person's perspective, and so it benefits everybody.
And I like, so Dana saying, some of these are supports we often give our neurodivergent school-age children. When will the world realise that children grow to be adults and their neurology continues to be the same or function similarly with growth? I mean, yes, we obviously definitely change, but Annette's definitely taught me, before Annette, the idea of, well, I didn't really know about stimming before Annette anyway, because I kind of met Annette at my very sort of early discovery of my autistic self. But now I've just got, stimmy objects everywhere. They're stim tools to me. Yes, they are made for children, but they're just a tool for me to be able to regulate. And a lot of what I talk about when we do training and things is, particularly when it's like schools and things like this, is you need to model it from the top down.
Yeah.
So like I say, my five seminar groups that I had, like I say, 80 students, that was 2019-2020 academic year. So I looked through all their ILPs, all the inclusive learning plans that existed. And across my 80 students, I was thinking, this is not enough. I would expect far more disabled stroke neurodivergent students. So they are not, either they're not aware or they've not disclosed to the university. So I was really conscious of that. And so I put out like a questionnaire, anonymous one, where anybody, regardless of a learning plan, could tell me what need they might have. But the thing that was important was when I started teaching them, because they'd not met me before, I told them about my accommodation needs.
Yeah.
It's so normal, and it's normalizing. It's just, and that comes with finding that community, right? You became part of their community right then when you did disclose that. It's so important, so that people,
a number of them approached me throughout the term saying, I think I might be autistic, or I think I might have attention differences and things like that. So I definitely think the numbers increased as we went through, because I talk about it. We talk about it in the chapter, which is, again, normalizing it. Well, I mean, what we're talking about that in the chapter, obviously, is accommodation needs as academics. Basically, we were in that really weird position where we were both research students. So really, the chapter, you can use it. There's actually accommodations or understanding in there that you can understand for school children.
You really can,
in employment. So I know it sounds really specific, but it's not. It's just that that's who we were at that point when we wrote it. We were students and staff.
Well, it comes back to that point. They were saying, we become adults, and ultimately in the chapter we're talking about, lecturers to a certain extent need reasonable adjustments as well. And we're not thinking about adult lecturers as autistic individuals that actually might need reasonable adjustments. What could be as simple as giving them a disabled parking space or something, so they don't have to stress about parking, or giving them longer to mark than because they for me, I'm dyslexic, and autistic. Marking is quite difficult for me. Giving you support in those ways that actually what we wasn't thought about within our departments, and actually to a certain extent still isn't. They're still trying to just support the PhD students. So it goes all the way up.
And you talked about being able to choose your classroom, and if there is a classroom change, letting you know in advance so that you're just not so dysregulated from this change in routine or change in what you thought was going to happen.
Because we do talk about that in there, don't we? Which is that I would get really confused about how a colleague of mine, so again, another PhD student, basically, how, they would do so much in one day, including prep for teaching, then go back into doing research and things like that. Whereas for us, that's a lot of cognitive resource. That's a lot of spoons, that's energy, so prep would take us longer because we're really thorough. Also, again, if you're like dyslexic as well as and also potentially dyspraxic like Annette, potentially that prep also might take longer because you're trying to do slides. Whereas I love a PowerPoint, not everybody loves a PowerPoint. So the prep takes longer, the actual teaching itself. So we have what's called a Kent hour. So you don't technically teach for 60 minutes, you teach for 50 because you're supposed to leave time to pack up and then the next group move in, you move out to the next class if you have to move, that kind of thing. So one day I was teaching, I had 4 of my seminars. So of my 5 seminars, I had 1 on a Monday and 4 on a Friday. The same content as well. So I had 2 classes back to back, then I'd had an hour break. This is just the way it was timetabled. And then like the other classes, right? That's exhausting. And like say my peers would just be getting on with it. That I'm out, I'm down. I'm down for the count after that. We need
recovery time,
more recovery time. So those things aren't considered or necessarily taken into account when you're thinking about you've got an autistic lecturer or teacher or whatever.
So let's talk about self-disclosure though, because you did talk about that in the chapter. And you talked about the potential consequences of somebody disclosing to either their professors or to their students or to their peers about being autistic. So can you talk about self-disclosure and then maybe talk about ways that professors, students, peers could support those autistic people?
Annette, I'm just going to give the stats, if that's all right. And then if you want to... Yeah, so I've just got the stats up. So when we wrote the chapter anyway, they've slightly updated since then, because at that time when we wrote it, we only had the stats for the certain years, right? So we talked about that there's been a slow increase in disclosure of autistic academics, right? So we're seeing an increase in disclosure of autistic students, a very, very small, teeny tiny incremental increase in autistic academics disclosing that they're autistic. So for instance, in 2014, so these are like their higher education statistics for the UK that I looked into. So 2014, 65 autistic academic staff in higher education. There are thousands of staff. 2018, 140 disclosed. Okay, so we're seeing a slight increase, right? But even if, and I haven't got the full stats here, which is kind of frustrating, so I don't know if you've got it in the book, Annette. But there's, if you do the conservative estimate that 1 in 100 people are autistic, and we'll leave it at the conservative,
isn't it?
Yeah, we'll leave it at the conservative one because some of us may be disabled to such an extent that we just don't end up getting to an academic position, right? So we'll leave it at the conservative estimate. So if 1 in 100,
filter them out very early on.
Exactly, right? So, but even if we stick with a conservative estimate, 140 autistic academics throughout the whole of the UK and all of our universities is grossly underestimated.
I mean,
right?
We probably know more than that.
We probably know 140 autistic academics.
I know right now.
I know at least 3 academics who are autistic but don't disclose. That's for sure.
So
why not disclose though?
Exactly. So this is where we started talking about why aren't these academics disclosing? Now, it might be that they don't know they're autistic. I'm pretty sure in nearly every department you go into, academia works for us in a lot of ways. There's a lot of ableism. That's obviously the purpose of the book.
Yeah.
But there's also a lot of, particularly in the UK, you know, unless I've got classes or something like that, I don't have to get out of bed at like ridiculous o'clock in the morning. Like 9 a.m. to me is the middle of the night. Okay, I don't function very well at all. I'm a much of a later day person. You know, I get to focus on the things that we're interested in.
It's much more flexible.
Yeah,
you have rest time, so you've got lots of breaks in the year that you can actually take time off.
So there's lots of great things about academia, which means that you will get a lot of autistic people, but they're just not disclosing either because they don't know or the stigma. And Annette is more aware than I am because a lot of people would, and we can't obviously disclose who they are, would say to Annette that they think they're autistic or that they are and they know they are, but not telling the university.
So what types of what type of stigma would someone who's in the academic setting face? And I know y'all talk about this in the chapter, and I don't want to give the whole chapter away, but
it's fine. We're only one chapter. The book's
there's loads of stuff.
Sorry, I just saw Si's 11:59 in the morning is too early for you. I totally agree with you, Si. Go on, Annette. Sorry.
Oh, what was I going to say?
What is the stigma? What do we face basically if we disclose, or what are we fearful of if we disclose?
Yeah, I mean, there was lots of. I mean, for me, it's harder for me to answer that question because when I discovered that I was dyslexic and autistic, or even before I knew I was diagnosed as dyslexic and dyspraxic, I disclosed to my students because I felt it was really important that they knew an adult, a successful adult, you know, that was like them, that they could succeed, that they could do what they want. And also I had to, because, you know, I'm writing things on the board because I worked in like a high school situation, teaching students in a college in the UK, which is a little bit different. But anyways, I would be writing things and obviously I'd misspell things and I would get numbers wrong and things like that. And I would just say, you know, if misspell something, you know, you can tell me, you can help correct me. So that was really important. And I did feel it was very important for that. And when I started my PhD, it was on the basis that I was autistic, and that I was going to do a project for autistic people by autistic people, which was myself. But I think, you know, I've had a lot of people tell me that, especially early on in my diagnosis, when I was diagnosed, that I wasn't autistic and that my diagnosis was wrong.
So you would tell them that you're autistic and these people would say, no, you are not.
Yes, to your face. And after knowing you for like a minute, you know, that was a hard bit.
Right.
To a certain extent, and also kind of look at you as if maybe, I mean, Chloe's had, you should probably explain more of what yours, because
I think Annette's situation is slightly different because you did your PhD and everyone with the knowledge that and the purpose was she was an autistic person doing a PhD, right? So that was slightly different. Obviously it was different for me because I didn't know I was autistic when I started my PhD. So I made the decision.
I never would have known.
So my way of disclosing to my school that I was autistic. So I basically told my two supervisors first. They were both great. Particularly my second supervisor, who eventually became my first supervisor. He was just like, it didn't really make any difference to him because he just thought he knew I was capable and all that kind of thing. So he was great. So my way of disclosing, I decided, because I love PowerPoints, was that I know every year PhD students are expected to either give a poster or a talk on where they're at with their research to the school. Right?
And you made a PowerPoint.
So I made a PowerPoint. Right. So at the very start, before I talked about my actual research, I'd made the decision that it was easier for me to just tell the whole school in one hit without having to have one-to-one conversations. I could cut conversation dead because I'm up there doing my thing. And, you know, that's actually a PowerPoint. That's a projector stand. So I can hide all the nonsense, like books that are piled up behind here. So yeah, I did that at the beginning. I did basically, those sort of cheesy icebreakers where you say 3 things and only one of them is true.
Mm-hmm.
So my 3 things, or no, was it 2 things and 1 was false or something like that? Anyway,
truth and a lie.
Yeah. I had a lie on there, but one of the things was I am autistic, blah, 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 blah. And then I asked, what people thought. And because my whole thing was about stigma, like my whole research, I kind of tried to sell it as this is just to show you how easy it is to change your mind about somebody or to have preconceptions and this kind of thing. So that's literally how I did it. I was just like, yes, I'm autistic, blah, blah, blah. And then I got to carry on because the rest of it was having to talk about my research. So it kind of cut the conversation dead. I really was quite naive in thinking that if I explained to people I was autistic, it would just help them understand me a bit better. And that, I think, was quite a naive perspective. For the majority of, I think it helped a number of people, particularly some of my peers who I liked and got on with, because I do struggle to connect with people, be friends with people. And certainly if they're not autistic, it's much easier for me if they're autistic. But it helped people understand why I was so blunt and to the point in emails, right? So initially they thought I was rude. And then when they realized I was autistic, they just were like, oh, okay, now I get it now. It's fine. You just don't. There's just no need for the waffle in between. How are you? How's the family? I don't care.
I like in your email.
I was going to say
email me. It has that at the bottom. It says, "I forget what it says.
It says tone and intonation are not easily conveyed via email. I, Chloe, will be polite and to the point in emails." And I started adding that as well, and it really helped as well, so that people weren't misunderstanding that they're just going to get bullet points from me. I'm not going to I get too many emails to mess about with fluff. So yeah, the majority of people, I think it was good. But I think what I wasn't prepared for was that I went from being perceived, and I know I was perceived this way because people would tell me to my face, that I was perceived as unapproachable, intimidating, but very competent and overly confident, in quotation marks, which is, I see as an insult. Really what they were seeing was my autistic neutral face or my mask. But that's how I was coming across before disclosing I was autistic. I certainly felt a shift in a very small number of people, that they started kind of infantilizing me somewhat, or as if I was suddenly a child. The way they were talking to me, I just didn't feel that they talked to me in that way.
You're not as intimidating anymore. You are now somebody that they need to like coddle on them.
Yeah, or pity. Yeah.
And so I really appreciate the number of people who either didn't change their perspective, well, not change their perspective, but didn't change, like they would work with me to accommodate me, but they didn't see me in any other different way. They didn't think that suddenly I wasn't capable of my PhD and things like that. So like I say, my actual supervisor didn't matter to him an iota, right? So that was great.
That is
some
great.
people, and some people, so when we did this chapter, we talked about what to do with it, and we like academia to some extent. It is difficult. So we kind of talked about, I don't want to be slating academia where we want, you shouldn't poop where you eat, right?
Yeah.
So we talked about what does good look like that we've experienced so far, and what could better look like.
But before we go on to that, I do want to say that, it isn't safe for everyone to disclose. And, so people can lose their jobs. People can be discriminated against, experience ableism. There's all sorts of reasons why someone wouldn't act autistic as well on, for a certain extent, because they, it might not be safe for them to do that. And that is a real thing, that needs to be acknowledged.
And this is an example here, and it is an important point. I'm not sure what PGCE is, but
it's a certificate in education so that you can teach, basically, in the UK.
So it's a teaching certificate, so you can teach in a school or a high school or a university, depending on what that's high school. Yeah, and you can be bullied as well. Yeah, which is not nice. And
I'm sorry that happened.
Yeah, and to a certain extent, I think, you know, and that's due to people being, you know, ignorant, basically, and not understanding.
And it's not just academia. I mean, that's
No.
everywhere. I mean, like that's the entire world almost. I mean, we talked to Morinike Giwanawu about their experience as being an adoptive parent, and not an adoptive parent, a parent. I don't know how to say that. A parent of adopted children, and one year she got like parent of the year. They got like parent of the year or something. And then after they disclosed they were autistic, it was like maybe they shouldn't be adopting kids, or maybe they couldn't really care for those kids. It's a global thing.
Yeah.
And that's a complete misunderstanding about what it means to be autistic.
Be autistic, yeah, definitely.
For sure.
Yeah, and really being in academia is probably easier than a lot of those other careers. So that's and like Chloe said, we wanted to say what is good practice, because there is a lot of good practice within Kent, and we're developing practice as well. So
sorry, just reading the comments as well.
Yeah, I did too. Oh, lots of parts.
And Denna's reply of from intimidating to being infantilized, how did you respond to that? If anything, I was really confused. I hadn't expected it. Like I say, I was really naive. I thought, oh, this will just help people understand that I'm not cold or unapproachable. I'm autistic, and actually maybe they need to make a little bit of effort to talk to me, because I will struggle to talk to them. You know, I had this very naive understanding of how they would understand it, right? So yeah, I don't know if I've ever really dealt, but it doesn't happen often. And I've had this conversation with our students, I've had this conversation on Academy, but I don't understand. I'm very openly autistic. Like, if people don't know I'm autistic, they must be living under a rock. Okay. And particularly in my school at the university. So I'm sorry, I keep referring to school. That's how we call the departments. So just in case that's confusing for people. So yeah, it's very confusing to me if people don't know that I'm autistic, for instance. So I very rarely, I think in the whole time since I've known I was autistic and then got diagnosed. So I was diagnosed in 2017, knew since 2016. And in that whole time, I think maybe 2 or 3 people have questioned my diagnosis or questioned my autisticness, if you like. So I guess I don't give people any leeway, because I guess to some extent I'm confident in knowing who I am, knowing that I'm autistic and things, that I don't give anyone the chance. So the occasion when one lecturer was actually asking my advice on inviting somebody in to come and talk to his students about autistic experience, right? I mean, he wouldn't have called it autistic experience, but that's what I call it. And he was asking me advice about, could we invite this person? And I said, yeah, but you can also ask me, you know, I can come in. And he was like, why do you think you're autistic? And I was so thrown by the question, and just looked at him and I just went, because I have a diagnosis. Like, I didn't know what to say, because to me, diagnosis it's not important. It's not necessary. Right. Yeah. I don't want to detract some people. It is important. I don't mean it that way. I mean in the sense of, you don't have to have a diagnosis to be respected as an autistic person.
And a lot of times it's a privilege to get a diagnosis.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. But I was so thrown by because nobody's ever said that to me. So I just looked at him really confused. It's like, because I have a diagnosis. Like, yeah, it was really, yeah. So I guess it hasn't come up enough for me to even know how I would respond. So that's my answer to Denna.
Yeah. So we were talking about good practice, were we not?
Oh yeah, good practice. Yeah. So disclosure. Yeah. So disclosure, why people don't disclose.
Yeah.
The stigma. It's scary. The narratives. I know. Thanks for that, Si. So if you're not used to Academy, we have in sort of house debate. You're either team salad cream or team mayonnaise.
What is salad cream?
Exactly, because you're from the States, right? So you don't know what salad cream is.
It's a bit like Miracle Whip without the sugar. So it's funny.
It's amazing stuff.
Yeah. I just say I'm Miracle Whip. So
yeah, but we're a very small team. The team salad cream is very small. So that's I hate salad cream with a passion, whereas it's one of my favorite condiments. It's the favorite condiment. Anyway, sorry, distracted. So what does good look like?
Yeah.
I guess the way we kind of, I guess if you noticed the way we tried to structure the chapter, was to consider key things that we might be challenged by in our environment, and then discuss what the key differences as autistic people we might have. And then, okay, what's good look like and what could potential adjustments look like? So one of the examples, which you've already mentioned, was like the challenge of change. So for some of us, we have that need for routine, for sameness, predictability, and to avoid sensory overwhelm and things. So like you said, it's useful if people let us know in advance if they've got to change their rooms. Or
interrupt her. I also like how you talked about the peers, and honestly, I'm not sure if this was for peers. In my mind, it was, but the whole gray area situation with the PhD, I'm not sure. But like inviting or like checking on your autistic peer, like in a social situation, because academia, they do have these like office fancy parties, and they have all these like
networking
opportunities, which can be like super stressful, right? I mean, even to me, I just had to go to a soccer mom thing the other day, and I was like, oh my gosh. My dad went, and I was like, Dad, make sure you talk to me at some point. And he did. Like he would say, oh, do you know my daughter Megan? You know, this is because he lives for that kind of thing. He's like a schmoozer or whatever. But having, like, if you know that your peer is autistic, like having that conversation with them, like, how can I support you in this? Maybe you can introduce your friend to people if that person doesn't like starting the conversation, or if they're just at the table, bringing them some food or something like that, so that they don't miss the opportunities to network, because that's where a whole lot of this, that's where a whole lot of the ladder climbing happens, right?
Yeah, it's about who you know.
Yeah,
definitely.
it shouldn't be like that, but it is.
Chloe's really good about that. She like emails people ahead of time, like really famous people that she knows it's going to be at a conference.
Okay, to be clear, when we say famous people, we mean like academic bigwigs. We don't mean like
not like movie
Kardashians
stars.
Or something.
Y'all are like famous to me. I mean, like I know exactly who you are. Like I would be like, oh my gosh, they're coming to a conference. Oh
But she'll actually
we're just excited to talk to people.
Yeah, but she'll email them and say, I'd really like to talk to you, but sometimes I'm not very good at approaching people. So I'll be the awkward, bald-headed girl with glasses in the corner looking at you, please,
please include me, right?
Yeah.
Hard.
But it works. Most of the time they're really appreciative and they're kind. I did that with lovely Professor Peter Kinderman, who's just really I like as a person. I've met him a few times, but one of the initial times, I emailed and I said, I'd really love to just 2 minutes of your time just to say hello. And exactly that. I will be the awkwardly hovering, shaved-headed woman in a dress standing next to you. And he said,
looking mean, apparently, and intimidating.
I didn't necessarily put that bit, but he said, I'll look out for you and all this kind of thing. And he did. And we had a nice couple of minutes conversation. I've had a longer conversation with him at other events that we've been to. So it kind of helped with that, because otherwise I just stand there staring, waiting for them to stop talking to the other person, and just it's very uncomfortable for everyone.
Trying not to look conspicuous that like you don't belong here.
And I made the mistake once, like I went to quite a few conferences during my PhD, because you have slightly more time actually to do things which you wouldn't normally. And I would go to a number of conferences, and on occasion I took my partner. But he's autistic with attention differences, and he's quite impulsive. He's not particularly good at recognizing that Chloe's anxious. Maybe we don't do that thing that will probably make her more anxious. So he's not particularly good at that. And I remember, being at a conference, there was somebody I would really have loved to have talked to. And I was kind of waiting for them to stop talking to people, right? Because I was like waiting for my break to like get in there. And he pressured me so much to go over and things like that. And I got so overwhelmed. I just said, I have to leave now. I have to leave. And just left because I just couldn't do it. So that wasn't probably the best idea, but it's not his fault. He's just,
he should have just walked up to the person and said, oh, this is Chloe. Right. She wanted to talk to you.
That would have been worse.
I'll get my dad to start doing lessons on introducing folks and schmoozing, helping other people fit in.
I mean, just saying this is so and so and they're good at this, or it's quite simple. I'm also recognizing if somebody's distressed. There's sometimes when we're in a big room with loads of people talking, then I get overwhelmed, and Chloe will notice I start to rock a little bit, and she's like, okay, it's time to go. Annette had too much, but
that's
even wearing earplugs. So we have earplugs that are on a string that we wear during conferences, or even when we're presenting, when we have other people chat about something, just so we're not being overwhelmed by noise the whole time, because that can be really overwhelming.
And that's quite important as well. Like if you know somebody else is neurodivergent, particularly when we've got different profiles. So like at times, I don't know if that's in the chapter or not, because the chapter got whittled down. There was quite a bit more to it.
I didn't see that part.
Yeah.
No, well, I'm just thinking there's, when Annette would get really, really sensory overwhelmed or just had enough, she would come to my office and just sit under the desk with like a coat over her head. And I didn't think anything of it because it was just a need to regulate. But I can imagine that would look really odd to other people.
Yeah.
So it's recognizing that those things are okay. Just really random things.
Yeah, that's just Annette under the desk. Don't
yeah.
I mean,
and like Annette says, it's picking up on those little things. It's like, I know Annette, so I know that tiny little rocking movement means, okay, we're getting close to extreme overwhelm now.
Yeah.
Let's maybe move. Let's maybe get away.
Just like I'm sure loads of parents can see that in their kids as well.
Yeah. My kids shut down, so they could do that blank stare where there's like they're not actually in this world anymore. They have retreated.
Glassy stare,
that blank stare, like that. I remember it happening one time. I used to be confused about autism. Like this is in the early days, like with the meltdown situation. My kids never had meltdowns, like not real meltdowns. So I was like, well, why don't they? What is this? And then I realized they had shutdowns. They just shut down completely. And I recognized it in myself. And I have ADHD, so I just zone out a lot of times, right? Like I'm just not even in the room anymore. And I saw it. We went to a indoor water park, and we were at the candy shop, right? And at the candy shop, the kids are supposed to be like, candy, and they were not. They were like, So my husband, he was like, I'm going to get the car.
Yeah.
He pulled the van around, and they were so happy to see that van. We've got to get out of here.
This comes back to the issue with the really narrow portrayal of what autism is there's so many different reasons that I wasn't recognized as autistic. Part of that is down to Sacha Baron Cohen's cousin coming up with this idea of the male brain, because I'm nothing like that. I'm nothing like my partner who's 6'3" with a beard, and very different person to me. So there's so many reasons I got missed. I shouldn't have. It was really clear when you look at me as a child, the stimming, the communication, it was clear that I was autistic. But there was parts, again, when I was still looking into, am I autistic, just before my diagnosis, I don't melt down. I can't be autistic. I don't have special interests in quotation marks because I'd made my career my dedicated
Special
interest,
interest,
right?
yeah.
So I didn't think I had any interests because I didn't think of it that way. I thought of it
worked, right? You just you
I
were
just
working on stuff.
Yeah. And it took other people to say to me, it's psychology, Chloe, it's mental health and stigma. And I was like, does that count? And they're like, yes, because that's literally all you're interested in, the only thing you talk about. And I'm like, oh, okay. So yeah, I didn't melt down. I shut down. So yeah,
there are so many stereotypes, because I remember when my kids before diagnosis, right? Like when we were like, maybe not, like what's happening. And I was like, well, they can't. Back then I have autism, right?
Yeah.
They can't have autism. They smile. Like they smile a lot. Because I mean, honestly, like all I knew was that, that commercial with the little boy, like in that like really dark, damp,
horrible imagery
somewhere, like, just rocking back and forth in the dungeon or something. I was like, well, they smile a lot and they play with each other. They can't.
Yeah.
No.
We're portrayed of not having any joy or emotion or
it's either because they're completely misunderstanding what autistic joy and happiness and so on looks like, because it might look very neutral faced. It might look like rocking, because rocking doesn't have to be a negative thing. It could be an enjoyable stim.
All day long. That's my boys. They're rocking together.
And so on. And so what they're really talking about is a distressed autistic person. There's distressed rocking, there's distressed headbanging, there's also happy rocking and happy headbanging that doesn't cause
bored rocking. I mean, it's all those levels of emotions that stimming is related to. It's not just one emotion, or and a lot of times one stim will mean different things depending on how that person feels.
And I'm thinking of so Jennifer's saying about, meltdowns are awful, shutdowns are scary as a parent witnessing them. And I think when it comes to things like shutdown, obviously I'm talking from personal experience. So this is purely personal experience. Sometimes I guess those shutdowns could be a very distressed response for that autistic person, that you would be worried about them potentially. But sometimes my shutdowns, for instance, are purely just sort of survival at that point. And I know that sounds kind of scary, but I'm imagining, because I don't leave the house at all at the moment. I only go food shopping once a week and that's it. And that's good for me. I've realized I was really hyper vigilant for years. And now that I've been forced into lockdown, I've realized I'm a lot less stressed and a lot less anxious and not hyper vigilant constantly and things. So the only thing I can think of it as an example at the moment is me going food shopping. So me and Louis will go late at night when there's next to nobody there. I've got things I can put in my ears. I've got things to fidget with.
Sunglasses.
Yeah. I'm not quite so bad with light. So Annette struggles with light. I'm not quite so bad with that. It's more, it's more like noise potentially and that kind of thing. But what I've realized, and I pay attention a lot now, when I get to the checkout, is that's when I kind of not shut down, but I definitely blank stare and kind of retreat and disappear into myself.
It's almost like a disassociation, like
to some extent from the environment, but not from myself. Right. So and so I tend to do like this toe tapping thing that I'm unconsciously doing, and then I become consciously aware that I'm doing. So I'm focusing on my toes tapping. So like literally like tapping the toes off of the ground, if that makes sense. But I've noticed, and I'm blank stare and things like that. But it genuinely is just a way for me to get through that checkout part. So I know it can look distressing out to outsiders, but I'm okay, right? I'm just trying to get through, and I just leave Louis to doing the packing. So I can't do it.
You've got so much sensory information going in that you actually you can't do anything else. That's all you can handle. I mean, I say sometimes when I get overwhelmed that I have to shut my eyes to hear people, because if my eyes are open, I've got too much sensory information going into them, too much visual things happening, and I have no idea what someone is saying to me. I have meltdowns and shutdowns, and a lot of times when I have a shutdown, I will just have to go to my bed and cover over me, dark room, because it's just too much sensory information for me. I'm the same. I wear sunglasses on the bus even. Part of it is the lighting, but it's also about not having eye contact with people. And if people can't see your eyes, they're less likely to have eye contact with you, because that can be really overwhelming as well. And, you know, to a certain extent, the more shutdowns and meltdowns you have, the more likely you will have, because we've got somebody talking about burnout here, autistic burnout, the more likely you'll have autistic burnout. And the one thing that we've found that's been really helpful for that is obviously practicing self-care, making sure if you've had a really sensory overwhelming day or a socially overwhelming day that you recognize that you need to recover from that, and that you don't beat yourself up for it, and that you make time in your schedule for that. But also giving yourself kind of a sensory diet, or, you know, allowing yourself to stim on a regular basis to kind of counteract all this sensory information that's coming in, because that stimming actually is us regulating our sensory information. So it actually allows me to be here on an interview.
After you did a practice.
I did a defense of my thesis today. I practiced defense of my thesis today.
That's the thing. Yeah. You should see us. We've definitely delivered, you know, presentations at conferences, both of us, with STEM objects and things like that. Like I say, we are in a privileged position. So I linked in. I basically in the comment section linked a blog that was just released for LSE, so different university, kind of building on what we talked about in the chapter and bringing in some of the things that we talked about in the chapter, and about how I'm really conscious that though I'm from an oppressed minority because I'm autistic, I am still a white female in academia and things like that. So to some extent, we don't necessarily have quite that much fear. I've lost my train of thought. What was the point? Oh no.
Stimming in public.
Stimming.
So not everybody, it's not safe for everyone to stim in public. I think that's what you're trying to say.
Oh, and yes, when we're at conferences, when we're presenting, you know, we are openly stimming, we are being ourselves and things like that, because there's no fear necessarily for us that we're not going to be necessarily taken seriously, or that we're going to be kicked out or something along those lines.
But we're usually there because we're autistic, so it's a bit different, isn't it? Yeah.
But this is kind of within that article as well that I linked, is that I don't know, but I feel that I have probably lost out on lots of opportunities because of being autistic and people knowing that I'm autistic, because of missing those networking opportunities, because I just won't go. You know, so all these sorts of things. So I feel that I probably have, but I can't know that for definite. I can't measure that, for instance. But what I do know is that being an openly autistic person, training, talking about research, that, you know, all this kind of stuff has actually given us opportunities. So, and like I say, within that article, what I talk about is I will never insist that an autistic person or a disabled person of any description discloses. It's really a personal decision to make. So that's not what I'm saying. It's no, I don't know what I was saying again.
Well, it's opened up opportunities. There have been sacrifices from you disclosing, but it has also opened up other opportunities, which maybe even like you maybe missed some opportunities that weren't super hot to begin with. Now you get to like actually,
or that I wouldn't have been interested in because they weren't that autistic experience.
But you would have accepted anyway, because that's what you do. Is like you take what the opportunities that you're provided. But now it's like maybe you're getting more better opportunities.
And that, thank you, because you've helped me with my train of thought. Which is that, yes, disclosure can potentially lead to loss of jobs and things like that, and potentially being bullied out of jobs, like I think I saw somebody saying. And I was talking to a fantastic autistic person today who feels that the ableism within when you're learning to be a counsellor and a therapist as an autistic person, because autistic people don't have feelings that mean we can connect with other
or
human
empathy.
beings in a therapeutic setting, this kind of thing. And so we were having lots of conversations about, you know, the issue, the ableism, that kind of thing. And what I actually said was, we need you, like, particularly in the UK.
Infiltrate that, please.
Yeah.
Is that we need you, because particularly in the UK, there's numerous conversations going on about the issue, how there's no autistic, not necessarily autistic led, because that's our goal, but there's no autistic informed therapies, right? So in the UK, probably the same in the States, if you want therapy and you're autistic and you tell them you're autistic, you will probably be dismissed and told that they can't help you, that you need to go to an autism service when it's actually a mental health concern, but you happen to be autistic at baseline, right? So, you know, trying to support
one of your co-authors in the Neurodivergent Reader was an autistic therapist, I believe.
Is that Lisa Cromar?
Yes. Yes.
So Lisa Cromar talks about person-centered counselling. I know just from so the person I consulted with today, I'm going to hopefully link them up to 3 other autistic therapists that I know, because so this is the thing. It's a very precarious place to be in. But if you're an autistic person who has some privilege of some description, i.e., I'm white, right? So I can use that to my advantage to like infiltrate, like you say, and then we can start to make the changes to make it easier for people who have those different intersectionalities. So in that article, I talk about the issue of our fantastic Sai, like being a male autistic with a beard who can't stim freely in public without families trying to take their children away from him and stuff like that's horrible. That's not safe. You know, black men who are autistic with the threat of violence for being an autistic black man, right? So can we make those changes if we're safe to do so? That's my soapbox.
Yeah, no, I mean, that's why we're doing what we're doing, and that's why we disclose, because we want to help, you know, autistic people over the world, especially the next generation is autistic people as well, so that they don't go through the same things that we had to go through.
Well, I think that it's amazing what y'all are doing, and I really want to make sure that anything y'all have coming up that I can help boost that. You can come on anytime to my page. Even if you just want to have a rap session like this.
It's like happy autism.
Yeah, like anytime, and you know, my page is your page, so please do, and keep us updated with all of your projects that are coming up. We've been on for almost 2 hours, and I have seen Annette go like this with her watermelon like 3 times.
She loves her watermelon though. That's a new one because she broke her last one, so I got that one for Christmas.
Chloe got me another one. Yes,
like she's like,
it's just my jaw. I get but I'm really enjoying it, and it's so great to see all these people and hear everybody's comments as well.
Well, and it's relatively new for Annette. I've had to wait for her to finish her thesis to be able to bring her on, right? Because I didn't want to bug her because she was so in it, and it's really hard. And I was like, I'm waiting for you to come and be part of Academy.
Yeah.
Yay! Which has always been the goal and the aim. Yeah.
And do check out Academy. That is a great website for parents, educators, autistic people, anybody that wants to learn about the autistic experience. Thank you all for joining us. Y'all are amazing.
Thank you so much for having us. It's been great.
Thank you, everyone else, too. Thank you, Chloe. Thank you, Annette. And y'all stay on, because I'm going to end the broadcast everywhere, and then we'll still be in the studio. Is there anything else y'all wanted to say?
I was just going to ask, because somebody just said, could they tag the book again? I think Sai might have it if he's there.
Yeah, and Kimberly, I see Kimberly and Angelina are still on as well. And yeah, if they can't get to it, then I will totally make sure that we re-link the things, because there's so many comments, which is amazing. Yes. There they come.
I was just gonna very quickly, so I'll just put that comment in there as well. So that was like the end part of. Did it go? I don't know.
I see one of my admins.
Oh, I might put
we'll pin it to the top, and I don't even know how to do that. Somebody, Angelina, knows how to do all of the things. Oh, there you are, Chloe.
Oh yeah, I just wanted to add. So it was one of the like. There was numerous sort of suggestions that we made towards the end. Some of it was like the need for inclusive teaching and working plans. So we have these plans for students. Why don't we have them for staff? Like, it's really weird because disabled staff exist. But one of the last things that we kind of talked about was the importance of recognizing autistic or neurodivergent people in general, but recognizing us from a cultural minority perspective. So in any of those spaces, like academia or work or, you know, whatever organizations it might be, as opposed to looking at us as or people with autism spectrum disorder, just looking at us as having a cultural minority status, because we have our own communication styles, we have our own, like I said here, like systemic factors.
Learning styles, everything, yeah.
Yeah. And someday, hopefully, there'll be an autism studies department or a neurodiversity studies department, you know.
Yes.
This will happen.
I think that's a fabulous idea.
Happy STEM.
Yay!
This is my wiggly. This is also my wiggly STEM when I'm really enjoying food. Like if I'm in a restaurant and I'm really happy about the
with
food.
Your salad cream, like.
Oh yes, exactly. I have my little wiggly STEM, and Louis like, "Are you enjoying it?" I'm like, "Yes."
I can imagine you in like your happy place, like eating your salad cream with your PowerPoint presentation. Like, this is the life.
What have you been doing? How are you in my flat? Rude. Watching me in my flat, doing my things.
Okay, thank you all for coming. And we'll be in the comments for a little while if you have any questions. And y'all stay on. Thank you both. Thank you, admins. Kimberly,
Thank you.
Angelina, and Sai, I think was your admin.
Yeah. So Northern Naughty is there. He's doing the gross comment emoji because
for everyone.
Thank you so much. Okay, I'm gonna end it.